Worst weddings you've been to and what happened? Went to a dry wedding. That's not just a description of the drink situation, but the entire affair in general. It was in a tent, in summer, in the South. Dress code specified men to wear jackets during the ceremony. Women couldn't have overly exposed shoulders or low cuts. Linen was not allowed. Ceremony itself took just shy of 2 hours and included multiple speeches by the bride, groom, and the minister. Both fathers sang gospels. The best man played acoustic guitar for like 10 minutes. The guests had to reconfigure the tent after the ceremony for their reception while the wedding party did photos. It was still summer. We found out there were assigned seats when the wedding planner went table to table and called out who was to sit where. We would be released to the buffet by the bride or groom, table by table. They stopped to chat with every table or take pics, etc. No dancing. The location was by a lake with a dock and patio area down at the water. We were to stay in the tent. More speeches were given. The bride and groom paused, releasing people to eat for each speech. The sweet tea was weak. The bride's father gave a long speech in which he only mentioned his daughter twice. Both times were in reference to giving his son-in-law healthy baby boys. The best man played guitar again. The cake was in the sun. The buffet was a dry barbecue that the groom and his new father-in-law smoked the day before. All brisket. Sides were just mac and cheese and salad. I left between when my table got released and the cake cutting. Partially because I was starving. Partially because I had 100% sweat through my entire suit. And partially because I'd arrived 6 hours ago. My plus one, a family friend, and I went with my mom to an Applebee's or something that was close by. At least a dozen of the tables there were other guests we recognized. I swear I saw a woman cry when they brought her a margarita. We heard that the reception continued late into the evening, including the bride and groom asking the remaining guests to all share a memory that they have with them. They spelled my name wrong in the thank you card. I can forgive a lot, but weak, sweet tea washing down dry barbecue? May the mosquitoes always find you. Story 2. It was in the middle of nowhere, held at a country club which I don't think had ever hosted an event of any kind. There was one motel in the town. There were no rooms left, so we planned to drive 3 to 4 hours there, see the wedding, leave when they got to the part of the reception when the dancing and partying started. We arrived, went in, and there was hardly anyone there. We make our way to where they're going to have the ceremony in some courtyard, and the chairs are all blowing away, and there are some staff trying to chase them down. But there had to have been a couple of hundred chairs, and there couldn't have been more than 20 or 30 of us. I don't even know who rented all the rooms. That's what I kept thinking about. We sat and were almost amused in a horrified kind of way. But no one else showed up, and the start time came and went uncomfortably, without anyone but the few guests showing up. Turns out there was no wedding. Someone cheated on someone the night before, and there was a big fight that morning. Thing is, I never really learned the details. At that moment, all that happened was someone from the venue finally came out and said, sorry, in the most awkward way, that we should go home because the entire thing was being canceled. Story 3. Crazy one that I attended. My wife's friend from another part of her life. She worked with this girl for about 6 months, 5 years prior. They communicated pre-internet by phone every couple of months and got together once or twice a year, even though we lived about 10 miles away. She was living with this hardcore, poorly educated. He was a hard worker, but was fairly mean. Add this, she had a kid with this guy who was 2 at the time of the wedding. We were invited, about a week out, Saturday afternoon at 4 o'clock at a restaurant. I had a lacrosse game, so I got there about 4:15. Nothing had started except for the drinking. 25 guests in all. Bride, groom, and best man are all hammered. 5-minute ceremony. Reception was just more the same. Minimal amount of food. Best man's speech was probably the inspiration for the Steve Buscemi character in The Wedding Singer. This wedding was in the same era, mid-80s. The speech was about how Greg took care of him, letting him live with a newly married couple, and his main hope for the couple going forward is that they wouldn't argue anymore. It was the most intoxicating wedding I've ever seen. And the night wasn't over. They were flying out of BWI Airport the next morning, and the bride suggested that everyone come to the hotel for more partying. We went. As we get into the lobby, another bride was standing off to the side as her husband was checking in. This intoxicated wench starts going off on the other bride. You're an ugly witch. I'm the good-looking bride. The other girl wasn't having any of it and started in on her, super close to a real fight. Let's go, both my wife said at the same time. Story 4. I went to what I can only describe as a redneck wedding a few years ago. Groom is 24. His bride-to-be was like 42 with 2 kids over the age of 18. so a weird dynamic to begin with. The ceremony was at a public park under a gazebo. The groom's parents were visibly not down with the wedding. It was hot as heck, and there was enough food for maybe 30% of the guests. We were told the reception was at the local Elks Lodge, which, while not very extravagant, at least had a bar and reception hall. Those were not rented out, however, just the pool. So you had the usual very old, very intoxicated clientele of a rural southern Elks Lodge who were doing their thing, and then 4 people, bride, groom, and 2 of their friends down in the pool, all passing around a bottle of Jack. I left immediately, and they got divorced 6 months later. Story 5. Worked at a wedding as a caterer where the bride and groom were mixed race. The families apparently were not fans of each other, and the mothers developed a jealous mentality of the wedding. If someone got something, the other had to have it too, or better. We got prepped by the event planner that we couldn't serve one set of parents first. We had to serve them simultaneously, or else one would perceive the other as getting one over on them. At one point, we had to move the bride's family table a bit due to some obstruction, but not that easy. We also had to move the groom's family table as well, so no one wasn't any closer than the other to the sweetheart table. We had to set the parents in the same spot at the table so they both had the same view of the sweetheart table, but not directly looking at each other. I even made sure the portioning was the same and that none of the plates presented any better than the others. Exhausting. Story 6. We went to a friend's wedding about 20 years ago in a sweet little town. Hotel was lovely and also the site of the reception. The wedding was early, at around lunchtime in a big French Catholic cathedral. It was about 95 degrees outside and the church was not air-conditioned. The wedding was a full mass plus actual wedding ceremony. We were starving, hot and thirsty by the time it ended. There were cocktails at the hotel while photos were being taken, which took 3 hours. We didn't want to eat because we were expecting dinner. Everyone took their seats, did the usual speeches and such. There was never any food. We left and ordered pizza in our room. The following day, there was a gift opening with brunch. The brunch was held before the bride and groom and their families, not for guests. It was a very hungry weekend. Story 7. So many speeches. They had both sets of parents, of course. Maid of honor, best man, of course. But then every other member of the wedding party also had a speech. There were 6 members per side. I think some aunts and uncles also spoke. Thankfully, they were mostly after dinner was served, so people weren't starving. But the bar was closed during speeches and the table wine ran out very quickly. The dinner and speeches lasted over 3.5 hours. By the time they ended and the dancing began, a large portion of the crowd just left. Didn't hang around for the first dance or cake, etc. Second worst. The bride and groom left immediately after dinner. Pretty sure they were waiting to have intimacy until after marriage. No actual post-dinner dancing, etc. They had a DJ, but he wasn't needed. Everyone just milled around for a while and then left. I wonder if they had a speech limit for the wedding party. Maybe something like, keep it under 5 minutes or we'll cut the mic. Story 8. Attending an in-law's wedding. Morning ceremony, so they serve breakfast. Not a nice breakfast. Think conference breakfast at the Hampton Inn. Rubbery eggs, cold pancakes. Each table got 1 bottle of sparkling wine for 1 toast. I got a text message the morning of the wedding. Turns out the bride's sketchy cousin was supposed to be her DJ. In shocking news, he bails. She asks me to DJ her reception, as well as play the music for her ceremony. I learned the ceremony music 5 minutes before the ceremony and wing it with my iPod and a speaker. I am then tasked with DJing her reception, including music for their introduction, introducing speakers, starting the toasts, the whole shebang. I received exactly 1 thank you from that entire side of the family. I have since divorced my ex and all of his awful, ungrateful family. Story 9. Mine. I didn't like my dress at all. I wasn't happy with the bridesmaids' dresses. I wasn't really happy with any of it, because no one listened to a thing I actually wanted. The dog passed away the day before. 2 of my bridesmaids just didn't bother to turn up. I had a severe chest infection. If I could go back in time, I'd have gone to the registry office with 2 people and my husband, got married, and then spent a fortune on the dress I wanted and a really good photographer. Got amazing photos and then went on a 3-week honeymoon. We're still married almost 20 years later, so there's that. The second worst was a friend. We all stood there asking her if she was sure she really wanted to marry him. Her attitude towards the entire thing was off. It was like, meh, I'll do this, and meh, that's good enough. They had nothing in common. The morning after the wedding, she came in at 6 a.m. I had all the kids with me as I was sober and on child-minding duty. And got her daughter and headed home. I remember telling my husband how annoyed I was when we spent money when they'd be divorced in 5 years. They managed 6, but has separated after 4. Wow, that's a lot of stress for one day. Story 10. So, my wedding. I apologize in advance. I'm writing this on my phone and we'll jump from event to event. My now ex-wife wanted an extravagant wedding. I didn't, but went with it for her. Originally, her parents offered to either buy us a house or pay for this wedding, and she chose the wedding. She was a total bridezilla. She insulted both of our families at the rehearsal dinner, forced all grandparents to wear specific clothing she picked, ordered her choice of food for everybody, regardless of what they wanted. She ordered a salad for my overweight relative. We had 250 guests, 23 of whom were mine to invite. Everyone else was from her list. Her father was an elected official, so literally half the guests were people her dad worked with that neither of us knew. She filled the registry with gifts that were way too expensive, so most people gave cash instead. That part I was okay with. Her gift to me was a boudoir photo shoot, which I found out she sent to her ex-boyfriend as well as me. Oh, he was at the wedding too, but I was unaware of their past relationship at the time. She cheated on me with him the day after the ceremony because an emergency caused us to reschedule our honeymoon, and she was upset with me. Long story short, don't get married just because you have a kid together. And don't mess with crazy. It messes you back and intentionally leaves the evidence at home. I've been happily divorced for 9 years now, but she still takes every opportunity she can to attempt to ruin my life. She still can't believe that I left her over her numerous and continued affairs she had over the 3 years we were married. Story 11. The wedding was fine, wonderful, but one of the groomsmen, who was my friend, gave me some gummies during the reception, and I was as a kite. A couple was there. People who I knew from work, and the woman's daughter, who was like 12. I knew from a different friend that this girl had tried to end herself months earlier and had severe mental health issues. Anyway, that little girl comes over to me and asks if I'll go outside with her. I say of course, thinking maybe she needs help with something. I go outside and she leads me a little ways away to a swing. I sit in a brick wall nearby as she swings. She starts telling me all about her tormentors at school, how she wants to hurt them, how she thinks she has demons inside her and she'll never be a good person, how she's afraid her mom wants her gone. All this stuff. I'm not super good at comforting people, but I tried. The mom and mom's boyfriend walked past. I figured they were just checking on their kid. Later I found out they just wanted to have intimacy outside behind the building. They didn't care at all that their kid was outside with me. The mom made fun of the kid the entire time, talking about certain delusions she had or different personalities she's had. I couldn't stand being around the parents anymore and had to leave the wedding. The little girl told me that she thought it was an angel sent to her. I'm still friends with the couple who actually got married, but that other couple I stay away from. There's even more crap about them I know about, but I won't say here. I feel really bad for that little girl and I hope she gets some actual help. Story 12. It was the now ex-wife's 2 best friends. Great couple. They were amazing. The wedding ceremony was fine enough, that it wasn't memorable in the least. Ex-wife neglects to tell me that we're camping for the night before and prep. I like camping, but not so much when I need to walk through a muddy field to shower in a pay shower, then try to keep my suit without mud. The good news is that the entire wedding party was also camping in a muddy field, so I wasn't the only one who was dirty. Ex-wife's most recent ex is also part of the wedding party, so she ditches me to hang with him. There's no one I know at the reception, other than the couple and the ex-wife. Dry wedding, but that wasn't that bad other than the lack of sociality for so many strangers. Stepdad of the bride is going to lead us to the reception. Pre-smartphone era. All is well, until he gets on the highway and takes off at over 100 miles per hour. After hitting 80 miles per hour, I refuse to continue to accelerate. Eventually, I pull over until we see another wedding guest who doesn't want to drive, almost double the posted speed limit. This became my problem for choosing not to follow the lunatic. As far as I know, they're still together. I hope so. They were cool, but I'll happily never see any of those people ever again in my life. Story 13. Went to a wedding of a couple that we had no idea were extremely religious. No drinks, no dancing. There was a string quartet that played during the sad happy hour while pictures got taken, etc. But they left as dinner was being served and no more music after. A crappy magician did a short, maybe 20 to 30-minute stage act as the cake was being served. Absolutely no traditional stuff like tossing the bouquet or anything that would somehow remotely be considered sinful. And lots of prayers. The only plus of the evening was that we got seated with extended cousins of the bride's family who spent the entire time messing around with the bride's mom and dad. telling stories of the crazy fundamentalist Christian stuff they had done to their kids. They were barely married when she left him. The last we heard from her, she was living with two guys who were both at least 10 years older than her and was quite proud of splitting her time between their two beds. Story 14. My maternal uncle and his wife. The whole wedding was a crap show from the start. The dresses. The bride's mother made the bridal party dresses, which, unfortunately, ended up looking like a toddler made them. The bridal party was charged $300 to $400 for each dress, because that's what you'd pay at David's Bridal for them. Pretty sure David's bridal dresses are professionally made and look like it. I was supposed to be a junior bridesmaid and had my own dress made by her. She forgot it. So I was out of place in nice clothes and the bride's mother complained the whole time. My mom's dress was too small because the mother of the bride told my mom to lose weight before the wedding. And when she didn't, it was her fault it didn't fit. Mom was pregnant, so losing weight wasn't going to happen. The maid of honor's dress actually was a wedding gown. Mother of the bride and maid of honor insisted and the bride backed down after being threatened with no wedding paid for by her parents. The groomsmen were all hungover and it was obvious that a few were The maid of honor fainted repeatedly during the wedding and things had to be stopped. She refused medical attention each and every time and somehow felt better when it was clear all attention was on her. Finally, right before the bride and groom spoke their vows, the bride hissed at the groom if he ever divorced her, she'd take him for everything he had. She repeated the threat when they had their children after each birth and added she'd take his children away from him. Story 15. A recent one. Wasn't a horror story, but it was bad, because I felt for the groom and bride. A lot of stuff didn't go their way. They were stressed, and even afterwards that night, they kept calling it a crap show. Being married myself, I didn't want them to look back immediately and just think that. It rained, and they wanted the ceremony to be outdoors. We were prepared to have it in light to medium rain, but not heavy rain. The best man didn't have his rental delivered. Not his fault, just a miscommunication. A lot of things were out of the couple's control, and unfortunately, without a dedicated day of wedding planner, the ultimate decision-making always fell on them. A lot of people were helpful, but no one person was the authority to decide, lead, or organize people. Even the execution of their plans. A lot of it was the groom and bride manually doing such things themselves. Not because no one wanted to help, but because they alone really knew what had to be done and exactly how. And when it didn't go right, they just had to decide, move on, and then relay that information to 100 people. One thing about the rain, they bought 100 or so clear umbrellas from Amazon. Because they wanted all the guests to be identical and look pretty in the rain, for pictures, etc. Unfortunately, the umbrellas were cheap as hell, crappy factory-made, and once they unboxed them, we could see they were breaking easily. So you have many people telling friends and family that, no, you can't use your legit sturdy umbrella that you bought from home. Take this cheap one and good luck. I literally saw person after person opening an umbrella and it immediately breaking the same way. Once we were finally holding the ceremony in light to medium rain, you had maybe 50% holding the umbrellas with two hands because they broke, 40% not using any umbrellas at all, and 10% defectors who just didn't care and used their own. No one was really being disrespectful to the couple either. It was just setback after setback after setback, and their whole schedule was dissolving before their eyes. They still got married, and had smiles all around, but yeah, at the end of the night they called the day a crap show. So my advice, hire a day of wedding planner. Or at least put someone else in charge of everything so the only thing they're focused on is getting married. Story 16. I was invited to a coworker's wedding at a really nice country club. Both of them were New Yorkers, and the bride was a very strong, confident, no BS kind of woman. The priest who was supposed to officiate the wedding fell ill, so the church sent in a backup or relief priest. Didn't know that was a thing. Dude starts the ceremony and proceeds to launch into this whole speech about how, according to the Bible, the wife is supposed to be subservient to the man and take care of making his meals and keeping the house clean, etc., etc. It was some straight out of the 1950s BS. We all knew the bride well and watched in amazement as she managed to keep herself together, but we could tell she was absolutely fuming. After the ceremony ended and she ran off to cry, her whole family, including her father and brothers, had the priest cornered, and I legitimately thought they were going to roughen up the guy. Story 17. I attended my mother's third wedding in South Lake Tahoe, Nevada. I must have been about 20 at the time. The wedding was held in one of those silly Vegas-style chapels that was a little bit bigger than a closet. Nevertheless, it had pews, and the owner really tried to make it look like a traditional church, albeit much, much smaller. My siblings and I, crammed into this little pew, were already mildly chuckling about the cheesiness of it all, when out comes the officiant, a burnt-out hippie guy in a choir robe. That's when her laugh started to become audible. What tore it wide open, though, was when the hippie pastor solemnly lifted up the white dais's top and pressed play on his little Radio Shack cassette player. What spilled forth was Wagner's bridal chorus, sounding as if it were coming out of a tin can. It was all too much for me and my siblings. We were overcome with laughter that just couldn't be stifled. My mother and her groom looked slightly confused. The hippie pastor looked offended, as if his service was as sober and dignified as the proceedings at Westminster Abbey. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 18. Met some friends working at a yearly nerd event. I was younger than them. They were in their 20s when we met. I turned 14 that day. We bonded for years, spending every summer together. When I was 19 or 20, their ringleader got married. It was kind of a surprise. She had dated the same guy for 4 years, broken up with him, and sometime later courthouse married his childhood friend after less than a year of dating. It was messy. Bride and I had a mutual friend, C. C had volunteered to make custom coats and dresses for the bridal party, neo-Victorian or steampunk wedding, as her gift. C had been on and off dating the bride's man of honor for years. Neither was perfect, but he had some obvious control issues and a personality issue of some kind. They broke up for good very shortly before the wedding, but the bride told him to make it work. C did. Man of honor, though, was another story. I had met him a year or so prior when the bride decided to try to hook me up with him at a party. The couple had broken up. I was barely 18 and was just excited to see many friends off-season. I brought a date and did not know I was being presented as a possible mate to a strange man. He looked like a member of Smash Mouth who had been booted from the band and now worked at GameStop in his late 20s. His entire sense of humor is quoting Family Guy. He was deeply not my type on every level, so I politely left to play lifeguard at the indoor pool. I was a very responsible, non-drinking teen. Eventually, the man of honor sauntered in, hammered, and declared that I was too hot for him to talk to sober. I laughed, pulled my friend aside, and told her to never try that again. Hadn't seen him since. At the wedding, he had obviously pre-gamed the ceremony and was visibly and audibly upset. I was furious his ex was there, mad to be wearing something she had made and making a scene. The venue was 15-plus floors off the ground, and he kept wandering out to the balcony, climbing over the railing and threatening to jump. After a few repeat performances, the bride told everyone she didn't care what he did and to move on with the party. I decided I didn't want to deal with the police, so I trotted out to the balcony, put on my dumbest voice, batted my eyelashes, and started asking him questions about hobbies. Eventually, he clambered back over the railing and followed me inside, where he proceeded to do the worm. I hope, it wasn't clear, and continued drinking. After the ceremony, the bride told her friends that she hated the groom's family and encouraged us to play rocky bands until they left. I realized at that moment that maybe I was witnessing a marital mistake, but there was cake and I had to wait for my ride to go home, so we played a rock band. Man of honor left to sleep it off. Groom's best man tried to cheat on his fiancée with me, and the bride encouraged it. Bride and groom had a few years of marital bliss before she started cheating on him, both in-game and IRL, with a guy in their D&D group. Then cheated on that dude with a guy she met on World of Warcraft. Story 19. Summer in California. Wedding was at a cute little church, which was double booked, so the wedding I went to put an arch up in the parking lot and did the ceremony there. Both sets of grandmothers fainted from the heat. The bride's grandmother went first. Somebody caught the groom's grandma. The bride's 98-year-old grandma went to the hospital but ended up being okay. We went off to the reception in a different location. Every one of the groom's friends and the bride's family acted like goddamn animals with inappropriate jokes, hooting like monkeys, shouting out explicit acts. The bride and groom left early and went to their hotel room. The groom's friends and bride's cousins went under their window to laugh, yell, and listen in on the wedding night to give the groom flack in his performance. I was 8 and still vividly remember how wildly uncomfortable of a crap show that wedding was. My mother refused to let us hang out with that side of the family again. Story 20. She bragged for years about how her father was the general manager of some prestigious hotel. Then they announced the wedding would be there. The wedding was at the hotel's banquet hall, which had the partitions to separate business meetings. There was a tiny arch that had fake flowers on it in the front of the room. That was the only decoration. The officiant had never met the bride or the groom. She was 15 minutes late and the sermon was her reading off the sheet. When I asked why about topic 1, he stated, "Read his answer. Repeat for her each question from the online form they filled out." It lasted about 15 minutes. The reception was cookie cutter, and the best man and maid of honor winged it with their speeches, and it was obvious. The bar turned out to be a cash bar, though we were told it was an open bar, so nobody really brought any cash. Her father had promised to have another room reserved for the after party. We got there, and it's another similar room. Again, no decorations. And it had 3 bags of Doritos and some pretzels, and we sat in chairs and talked for about a half hour. Most of the people canceled their hotel reservations because nobody was drinking, so we're fine to simply drive home. Story 21. Went to my wife's male cousin's wedding. We flew from across the country to go. My wife and the cousins weren't particularly close, but we rarely see my wife's family, and they were all attending, so we decided to make a trip of it. The bride had a nervous breakdown and canceled the wedding 3 days prior, after we already flew in, then came to her senses and put it back on a day after the original date. The groom's family is well off and paid for the originally canceled wedding, and then managed to get a small winery to handle the second wedding at the last second. About 90% of the guests still showed up to the restarted second wedding, many changing plans and even flights. The bride was in despair at the wedding and proceeded to get on the microphone and let loose a tirade and attack the wedding venue, who threw together a really nice reception that would have been fine had it been the original plan, but more miraculous was that they pulled it off in 36 hours. Oh, and the venue owners and their family were right there serving drinks and snacks. She then made fun of my nephews, my wife's sister-in-law who was suffering from postpartum depression and had gained some weight, another relative's autistic kid, another relative who was overweight. She then spent the rest of the night sneaking off getting blazed with her trashy bridesmaids. Story 22. The bride's grandparents were known to be extremely conservative, and they picked a church. The bride and groom came in from Alaska, so they had little to do with the planning. The first thing we noticed was a banner on the church. Convert the lost, no matter the cost. Inside the church was the entire catalog of Focus on the Family and other televangelist stuff. The location rarely saw hot days, so usually didn't need any sort of AC. This was, however, early August. The place was packed solid, and there wasn't even a single fan. The few windows that did open provided no crosswind. There weren't pew, just heavy cushioned chairs that linked together that made moving difficult. The room was hot before the services started and getting worse. This church made the wedding into a sermon. We didn't know the groom, but we picked up that he was not entirely there. The minister made the point of the service that the bride was nothing but a rib. Not the head, just a rib. Protected and close to the heart, but not ever to be the one to call the decisions in the relationship. This went on forever. The temperature rose and rose because they were backing the dinner in the basement. 4 ovens on, cooking lasagna for 150 people, and all that heat was going up to a room with no ventilation, and the hottest day of the year. We were finally released so they could rearrange the upstairs for the reception. The bride had wanted to have the attendees greet the new couple with thousands of bubbles. The tiny soap and loop thingies did not work at all, so she stood over the crowd of people baking in the sun and just blowing furious into these loops and getting soap fingers. People tried to escape, but we were all called back in the church. The pews were unlinked and put around tables, but because these were heavy fabric chairs, they were all hard to get in or get out of. These were a fire hazard. The last thing you wanted to sit on a hot day. Each table had a tiny, clear boot with floating glitter in them. My guess was that someone was making fun of Goldschlager, but I was wrong. The bride had said she wanted a fairy tale wedding and on a budget of $0. This book was as close as a Cinderella slipper as we were going to get. Dinner was served, and when the chairs and tables were so packed in, movement in and out was not going to happen. Plates were passed overhead that made sure everyone's food was messed up. Then the testimonials started. There were 3 types. The groom tried so hard and was never a burden. The bride is so fat. Remember when she ate a whole pie or cake by herself? Life is going to be tough. You're good people for doing this because Jesus tells you to. And when it goes terrible, just pray to Jesus. It wasn't a celebration for some. It was like a funeral for those 2 people fulfilling an obligation. It really showed that the generation before were stuck in loveless marriage and were afraid of hell. Then the father of the bride told the best wedding story ever. He told how the bride and groom met. The father told how a disgruntled ex-employee of the hospital his wife and daughter worked at came in with a weapon, mowing down anyone. The father told with glee how the guy went room to room with coroners reporting details of the wounded to make sure we all knew. He told about his wife locking a door and a doctor who played possum tried to get in. This went on entirely too long, and when he was told to move it along, he just dropped in that the groom was added theater security in the weeks afterward. This happening was the greatest thing that ever happened to the father, and he wasn't even there. Others declined to follow that, so the minister then went on to tell us about those that go to hell. Dinner is over and time for the reception. This was at a bomb shelter. One entrance, you went in, it was dark and there was nowhere to go. The family had a PA system and they sang Bible songs together as entertainment. They were blocking the entrance or exit, so you had to go past into a dark concrete bunker. Realize you couldn't see things except for the singer and then run the gauntlet to get out into the heat again. The PA system was a single guitar amp speaker, so it was too loud and every song sounded exactly the same. Dry reception as well. I considered being the hero and buying drinks on the way out and realized I have done my duty, so I just left. Story 23. It was a wedding where the bride and groom lived far away from their families and everyone, including me, had to fly in. The mother-in-law wasn't too happy with her son marrying the bride. Wedding went off pretty well and the reception was going okay. But the mother-in-law had a stank face and was audibly complaining. Then during speeches, the bride and groom stopped to thank people that helped with the setup and decorations, etc. The mother-in-law was mad that she wasn't thanked, for some reason. She ended up causing a major scene where she physically attacked her son while screaming at the bride and groom. Her entire side of the family left the wedding reception, which was half of the people there. Overall, the people that were left made the most of it, but the bride and groom were visibly shaken and left shortly after. They ended up getting a divorce a few years later. Story 24. My own wedding, from the planning up until the marriage crumbled. First things first, my ex was a huge mama's boy. Her son could do no wrong, ever. Second, he had a drinking habit. I knew it before I agreed to marry him, but thought I would be able to change him. His mother had to plan the whole wedding. From the god-awful plastic bouquets to the ham on the buffet table and dark smoke-filled Veterans Hall. It was decorated with pink and white balloons and streamers. Of course, no effort on her part. The wedding was in his hometown and my family traveled to attend. My mother begged me not to marry the narcissist the night before the wedding. This was related to his intoxicated and obnoxious behaviors at the wedding rehearsal dinner. But I loved him. We married the next day, and of course, his whole family was intoxicated and made spectacles of themselves. The best man drove his car in a ditch and sent the wedding cake flying into the dashboard and vents. Of course, it was everyone's fault, but he was in the back seat. Needless to say, this didn't last. I always thought I needed a do-over, but I chose the Japanese route for the next wedding. I let my daughter plan her own wedding with minimal interference from myself. The mother-in-law, on the other hand, it's always the mother-in-law. Story 25. Oh my god. First off, the bride is angry at me because she has a leftover high school crush on my then-boyfriend, now husband, but at her own wedding. During the vows, her kid keeps getting in between them and pushing the groom backwards while he's reciting the vows. No one does anything. The kid is wearing handcuffs on one wrist. Then the groom gives a speech about how after she messed with all his friends, he thought it was over, but nothing can stop true love. That was his toast to the bride. Then she and her two bridesmaids took turns drinking a bottle, heads back and arms out till it was gone. That was the toast to the groom. Hammered, she just kept heading out to smoke after and trails a lace-carrying waft of smoke throughout the wedding, where she tries to dance super inappropriately with my boyfriend, then passes out and is carried to the bathroom by the new husband and starts roaching down his back and trailing that on the floor while they go off to whatever Love Shack motel had the misfortune. It was my first introduction to my husband's high school friends. Story 26. My husband's cousin got married. Mormon wedding, but heathens attending, so it was an outside wedding. In July. The metal chairs were too hot to sit on, so we all stood for the ceremony. The minister, bishop, priest, spoke at length about how important it was that they balanced their checkbooks, and that now that they were married, they would have children who were blessed and would go to heaven. The issue? The groom's son from a previous relationship was standing right there, his best man. Those same chairs were used for the reception. Still too hot to sit on. Also, I went to one wedding where I sat behind the groom's grandmother. As the bride walked down the aisle, she said, in her I need a hearing aid voice, "I guess you can dress up trash." Story 27. This was in the early 2000s. The male and female attendants were in charge of the buffet meal, refilling serving platters, selling drinks at the bar, etc. The food was all straight out of cans and grocery store containers. Totally budget-friendly. No problem, just not typical. Then the bride and groom had a dollar dance and sacked quite a few bucks for the attendants, making a big deal out of shaking people down for 20s and no bills lower. Before the dancing was allowed to start, the attendants were all sent among the guests to sell 50-50 tickets to benefit the bride and groom. The winner of the 50-50 was pressured into donating their half, over $2,000, back to the newlyweds. So, full-on fundraiser vibe all afternoon and evening. The bridal party took turns playing music from their phones since the couple wouldn't pay for a DJ. The couple divorced within 9 months. Story 28. Went to a wedding where the bride was 45 minutes late. At one point, all the bride and groom's party was just up hanging out with those in the congregation making jokes. One of the bridesmaids called the bride and put her on speakerphone without telling her. The bride demanded loudly for everyone to hear, "I am a princess and this is my day." She was at Walmart getting pictures printed to put on the reception tables. The groom was downstairs, in tears. We played cards upstairs. Almost laughingly, we decided to go to the reception. When we showed up, the reception hall was locked for the first 15 minutes. Almost 2 hours later, the now intoxicated wedding party joined us. They walked in the door carrying 2 new steamers from Walmart and some uncooked bacon, and also had some large Sam's Club-sized cans of green beans. No can opener, though. One of the guests who had been waiting to eat for 2 hours opened the cans of green beans with a Bowie. They're still married 15 years later. Story 29. The worst was when my husband's sister married for the 3rd time. After being badly injured in an accident, she was partially to blame for. Mid-40s, sister-in-law woke up from a coma, considerably thinner, and, thanks to the family working on her behalf, about to win a 7-figure settlement. Sister-in-law literally went from being a welfare lifer to being a millionaire. Did she embrace this incredible second chance? Of course not. We managed to get her to buy a home, and wouldn't you know it, the handyman hired to work around the property found sister-in-law and her money to be irresistible and gave her a sparkling ring that she bought, and they couldn't wait to get hitched. Fast forward a few months and the wedding is being held at a country club. No expense spared. My other sister-in-law did their best to avoid it being a complete crap show, but it was inevitable. Our immediate family, the officiant, and a few family friends were the only people who followed the dress code, semi-formal, and acted appropriately. All of the bride's and groom's friends were there, as well as the groom's extended family, some of whom showed up in sweats. A sundress and flip-flops seemed to count as making an effort. The shenanigans began well before the ceremony. When the groom and his relatives were angry that the bar wasn't open, the bride showed up loaded. Her teen daughter left the reception to do stuff in the parking lot. Guests tried to steal the centerpieces, and the bride and groom had to be poured into their limo at the end. You know it's bad when the officiant leans over and says, "I wonder how long this one will last." Answer: until the money ran out. Story 30. Let's see. Not the worst wedding, but certainly memorable. 3 people got heat stroke and had to leave early to go to urgent care because it was a 100% outside wedding with no tent or shade in triple-digit heat. The caterers decided they hadn't been paid for any dessert services, so they left as soon as dinner was served, and family members were scrambling to serve the many plated desserts. Not a big cake. The best man kept calling the groom sensual instead of sensitive during his speech. Someone relieved themselves in the pool. Half the reception was out of their minds. I think the worst wedding would be the multilingual Catholic wedding I went to that was also 100% outside in triple-digit heat, with no shade structures, and started 2 hours after guests were told to be seated for the ceremony. And then the ceremony lasted 2 hours because everything, including Mass, was said in at least 2 languages. The marriage itself only lasted a year and a half. People that work in the wedding industry, have you ever seen a couple and immediately thought, this ends in divorce? I have a friend who's a wedding photographer, a rather busy and expensive one at that, so people usually book a year in advance. So she had a bride book the wedding date and pay the deposit. Nothing unusual there. The bride confirmed the venue, also booked and pricey, and had the general discussions with her about the style that she wanted, etc. They had regular meetings over the following months, but the groom was never there. A bit unusual, but not unheard of. So it's now 4 weeks before the wedding and they have the meeting to lock down all the details, but still no groom. My friend asks about him, and the bride mentions for the first time that she isn't engaged. Okay, maybe she has a long-term boyfriend and is planning a surprise wedding. No, it turns out that she doesn't have a boyfriend or any guy in mind, but she prayed about it and God told her to trust that he will provide a groom for her. So in the end, no groom magically materialized and there was no wedding. So in that case, the marriage lasted 0 minutes and we're all sure that it wasn't going to work out. In fact, at the time, we had some running jokes about her meeting a guy on a date and asking him if he wants to go on a wedding with her next weekend. Sometimes I wonder who auditions for The Bachelor or Bachelorette. Here's the answer. Story 2. I've been right a few times for sure. Photographer here. One groom was so full of himself but did that whatever you want, my queen thing where he wants to be seen as this great guy. But really, he's a self-absorbed schmuck. He was a chef and loved telling people that. It was a quick engagement and marriage, and I got the feeling maybe too quick. The wedding and reception were to be at his parents' place, and his mom had a lot of input, as did his sister. The bride got shut down whenever she talked. On the day of the wedding, I arrived to film the bride getting ready. She's alone with a hair and makeup person. I initially thought that person was a friend, but she wasn't. Her bridesmaids were not there. 2 hours go by. She can't get a hold of them. The makeup person leaves. I help her put her veil on and do up her shoes. I'm feeling so bad for her and also awkward as hell. This is supposed to be her big day, and here is basically a stranger putting her veil on and telling her she looks great. Finally, the bridesmaids come in. The maid of honor is the groom's sister. When the bride questions them, the sister says they went out for breakfast. The bride asks why they wouldn't tell her or bring her food, and they get pissy, like she's being a bridezilla. Then it comes out that the groom was invited for breakfast, along with the groomsmen, and they all had started drinking. It's only 11:30 a.m. and the bridal party is half lit. The kicker? None of the bridesmaids are dressed or have their hair or makeup done. The wedding is in 30 minutes. I got 0 photos of the bridesmaids. Ran to film the groomsmen. They're doing shots. I get some great photos of them because they're hammered and all dressed up and feeling great. Wedding happens and that part is fine. We're supposed to go to a nearby beach and trail for photos. This never happens because the groom is literally talking to every person in attendance in the longest receiving line situation I've ever seen. He keeps drinking. The meal happens and takes forever. The sun is about to set. I tell the couple I literally have 0 photos of them alone together and we need to go. He says, yeah, after the speeches. He gets up to speak after several of his friends and his sister do 10-minute speeches, and he goes on, and on, and on. Most of it has nothing to do with his new bride. 30 minutes into his speech and the sun is set, he finally finishes and I approach the bride. She just looks at me, defeated, and says, "You can just go home now." Groom was in the middle of a group photo, chugging a drink and laughing loudly while his beautiful new bride sat alone, seemingly wondering what in the world she got herself into. I delivered the images and they didn't pay the remaining amount. I got a million excuses. After a month, I finally texted him and said I was going through small claims. The next day, he sent an EFT with an angry message about hounding him and giving me a bad review. I saw her 6 months later at a restaurant, and before I could ask, she told me she left him. Saw him a few months ago working at a store downtown. I guess being a chef didn't work out. A friend told me they know of him, and he got fired from 3 restaurants. He ignored me while he flirted hard with this woman. I kid you not. Just before we left, he said to her, "I'm off in 5 minutes. I'll walk with you to that store. I'll tell Charlie to put that delicious cab sauv aside for you." So smooth. Good luck, lady. This was honestly one of the saddest things I think I ever read. Story 3. I don't work in the wedding industry, but I have a depressing wedding story. I have a friend who I grew up with. She was always gorgeous and incredibly popular with guys, and I always thought she was a great person. As I got older, I came to realize she was actually extremely toxic in relationships and did better when she was single. She had been seeing a new guy for 2 months when one day I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Knowing her history was a massive red flag for me. I turn up to the wedding and it's at a gorgeous little backyard type wedding. It's spring and everything looks perfect. I greet her family and it's like I've turned up to a funeral, not a wedding. They're all extremely solemn, and when I ask about the groom, her mother rolls her eyes and says, "This is a mistake." Wedding commences, and as the bride comes down the aisle, her face is gray and like she would rather be anywhere else. They exchange vows while the bride does everything in her power to not touch her husband-to-be, even standing a solid meter away from him as they stand at the front. She actually cringes and looks away when he gets choked up saying how much he loves her. When the priest announces the kiss, the bride takes a slow step forward and presents her cheek for him to kiss instead of her lips. No one cheers, it's just an awkward shuffling of feet and a few scattered claps. It was the worst wedding I'd ever been to. It lasted about 3 months before separating. Story 4. Used to moonlight as a musician for hire in college. I did more than a few weddings. Saw many that raised an eyebrow, but the 2 that really stood out as rough. Groom was super emotional and smiling when the bride first appeared at the church doors to walk down the aisle, and the bride was more interested in hollering at her family and friends as she made her way down the aisle. I don't think she looked at the groom once on her way down. Just saw his face drop. She got closer and had no interest in even looking at the man she was about to marry. The other I'd heard from the wedding planner, that the bride and her bridesmaids had gone through at least 10 bottles of champagne throughout the morning, and all were ridiculously hammered, and to keep playing no matter what happens. Well, two of the three bridesmaids fell and had trouble getting up on the way down the aisle. The bride and the maid of honor made it down the aisle, but had great difficulty. The groom basically was holding the bride up for the entirety of the ceremony, and she very loudly refused a chair. Also, the flower girl looked a little green around the gills and threw up into her basket during the vows. I guess she was either given or sneaked some champagne as well. Wedding planner said they argued the night before over whether they were going to drink before the wedding. The groom wanted to stay sober until the reception. Bride disagreed. Ran into the planner at another wedding, and she said they had a massive fight in the limo on the way to take pictures, which the bride's side of the wedding party was in no shape to participate in, so they skipped them. Photographer ended up doing a goofy shoot with a groomsman since they had already paid for the photos. Bride and bridesmaid sat in the limo drinking more. Showed up to the reception and the bride was passed out. The groom made an apology speech to the guests and got an Uber home, alone. On a nicer note, it was playing in a church that was not air-conditioned, in the middle of August, and the bride passed out from the heat. Groom caught her, laid her down super gently, ran and got a chair while someone got her some orange juice and did the entire ceremony with her in the chair, and him on one knee next to her. It was super sweet, and she cried the entire time. Another time, someone actually did try to do the speak now or forever hold your peace, and the bride whips around, cuts the guy off, and says, "For the final time, no. I never have or never will want to be with you. Shut up and let me get married." Kisses her groom on the cheek and says cheerfully, "Now let's get married." Wasn't able to get any background details in that one, though. Story 5. Not actually in the industry, but have helped out a friend with a few weddings. 2 of the weddings, I could just tell they weren't going to make it. The first wedding, the bride and groom hardly talked the entire wedding. It was like they had nothing in common. And then later, the groom pretty much got off halfway through and went home because I, quote, he was tired. So he just left his bride having to take pictures of the wedding guests on her own. He never came back that evening, so she had to greet everyone off, etc. Funny enough, about a year later, I heard they were filing for divorce. Another time was actually last summer. Just before the wedding speeches, the groom went to hang out with his friends for like half an hour, leaving the bride sitting there alone and delaying the speeches. And right after the bride and groom cut the cake, he once again went to hang out with his friends and abandoned his wife. So she was left alone having to mingle with all the guests, and he made no interaction with her side of the guests. He stuck with his friends the rest of the evening. His wife basically had to go and beg him to come and take more wedding pictures. At one point in the evening, he actually went for a drive with his friends for about an hour and his wife had no idea where he was. I mean, I get wanting to mingle with your friends at your wedding, but to not even mingle with your wife's family or friends on your wedding day seems quite rude. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 6. Was working at a hotel during a wedding weekend, and the father of the bride and the groom were caught doing something to one another by one of the staff 2 days before the wedding. We all had a bit of a giggle and assumed this was some sort of misunderstanding. There were weird ideas thrown around like maybe there's a family tradition where they hold each other's ducks while they kiss or something like that. Anyways, still in good spirits and the wedding goes ahead. At 7:57 p.m. on the night of the wedding, I brought the bottle of champagne up to the room, along with some other things we did for a wedding night. Normally before they check in, but they were already staying in that room before they got married. I was told there's nobody in the room and the groom is downstairs and the bride is supposed to be out getting photos or something. I knock. We had to, even when we knew somebody was in there, and quickly opened the door and walked straight in. The bride is with her wedding dress over her head and the best man is behind her. I just left the champagne on the ground and left. One seriously messed up family, but they all tipped well. Story 7. I was a wedding planner for almost a decade and saw these types of couples regularly. My biggest key indicator for this was whether they cared more about the wedding day than actually being married to one another. For example, I remember one couple who really wanted an over-the-top wedding that would be good enough to be featured in a popular luxury wedding magazine. They spared no expense. They became so obsessed with this that they were even choosing members of their bridal party based on their looks rather than their relationship with them. The bride had 2 brothers. One brother looked like a model for Hugo Boss, and her other brother looked a bit like Fat Thor. Well, only the hot brother was selected to be a groomsman. Things like this caused a lot of tension between family members and fights between the couple. It was awkward a lot of the time. I knew for sure this couple wouldn't make it for long. Interestingly enough, the couple divorced a week before their wedding was featured in that luxury bridal magazine. Story 8. All the time. You know how they say 50% of weddings end in divorce? I can pretty much predetermine who that 50% are going to be with about 98% accuracy. I bake wedding cakes for a living. I own my own bakery, but have also worked in a country club kitchen, doing basically the same thing plus other pastry chef duties on the day of weddings. I've seen them both for the tasting or design consultation and on their wedding day. I see how they interact when they're just together, but also when under stress and the big day. I've seen everything. Lots of cheating, lots of intoxicated people, lots of terrible mothers. Once had a mama's boy who ignored his wife when they were supposed to be having their cake tasting to cuddle their mother and hand feed her cake. His mother was not supposed to be there, and you could tell the bride was mad. By the end of it, he had kissed his mother on the lips multiple times. Divorce. I've seen a woman complain about everything her fiancé said. Any suggestions he had for what he liked resulted in him being called stupid. Anytime she'd open her mouth, he'd cower and flinch. Their cake actually got canceled like a month before the wedding, so wouldn't get anything but the deposit even though we'd started baking it. First time I've lost out on money and I've been relieved. Once had this arrogant schmuck Turkish guy marrying into this Bangladeshi family. Bride was sweet, about 10 years older than him and came from a fairly well-off family. Generally got the impression that this being a Turk or South Asian marriage was kind of a big deal, even though they're both Muslim. But since she was 30-something, they wanted her to get married, so they allowed it. Guy complains about everything during the planning process, especially over them not serving drinks. Is generally a schmuck to us, but is just straight up cruel to her. Like at one point when we were meeting, I asked after her wedding dress, because South Asian wedding dresses are gorgeous. She's showing me this amazing dress, and he says straight up, I don't know why she picked that one. She looks fat and old in it. Every other woman is going to be more beautiful than her on her wedding day. He then shows me this dress he picked out, which isn't traditional South Asian style at all, and is very Western and very ugly. It basically makes the model in the picture look bad. It's so sheer. When she says something about how no mosque would let her dress like that and her traditions are important, he just sneered and said she should get over it, and her traditions weren't that important. Divorce red flag. Found out later they didn't last a day. From the way the servers tell it, midway through the reception, the guy raises his hand to his new bride when she asks him a question about being hammered, and she flinches and turns away, protecting her face. He grabs her by the arm and turns her around, mad. Her mother and aunt were standing 3 feet from her and lost their minds, realizing what must have been happening there. His response when mom started to lose her mind on him was to hurt the mother. So in the middle of this very big 600-plus person Bangladeshi wedding, this 20-something outsider schmucks no one wanted her to marry anyway and hurt a well-respected woman in their community, there was a brawl. The cops were called. Marriage was annulled. Story 9. Oh yes, his bride was the definition of a bridezilla, forcing us to make accommodations and things we do as free courtesies that aren't actually paid for at all, included in the package she got. She got it in the end, but not before she made my life hell for a week while I was temping in the office. For her tasting, we had our table set up in her ballroom along with the tables of 4 other couples, all coming in at different times. My sister was her coordinator. I was the butler on staff that day. This woman stole some flowers off another couple's table, then got mad when I took them from her table and put them back. And she and her husband started running their mouths to their coordinator, who they loved and didn't know was my sister, about how I tried to tell them no and enforce company policy. How dare I do my job? My sister clapped them back by calling me over and introducing me as her baby sister. They immediately stammered out an apology. From there, it was mostly smooth sailing for me. But the reason we knew they were headed for a divorce was that the bride got wasted at her tasting because, lol, it's free and I want to know everything on your bar's menu. Within an hour, the trips to the bathroom started. Each time she went, the groom would not just flirt but aggressively hit on every woman in the ballroom. Day of the wedding comes around. The groom got into a fight with a groomsman that shattered one of her glass doors that led into the courtyard. The bride got hammered and spent most of the night crying in the bathroom. The groom ended up with a bridesmaid in the limo, where he was caught by his mother, which apparently is what started the fight with his groomsmen. It was a disaster. They didn't even last the full honeymoon. The bride and her mother came back 3 days later, demanding a refund because they were getting the marriage annulled. Story 10. A bit late to the party, but I played in a wedding band for several years. The wedding we played was being held at a farm and we were provided a green room or space to change, which was one of 2 small rooms built into the side of a barn. After the first set was finished, we and a few of the guests all headed back to this barn to hang out. Once we're inside, we can clearly hear 2 people having intimacy in the other barn room. We all think it's funny as hell and start making all sorts of noise to let the couple know that we're there. The noises stop immediately, but nothing else happens for a while, and we all think it's just an embarrassed couple sorting themselves out and bracing for the walk of shame. 20 minutes goes by and still nothing, so one of the guests knocks on the door to ask if everything is all right. The door opens, and the best man, who's married, appears and literally bolts out of the barn as fast as he can with his jacket over his head to try and hide his face. Then a few seconds later, the bride walks out and starts crying her eyes out. Turns out they'd been sleeping together behind the groom's back for quite a while. The groom got wind of it. There was a lot of shouting and then not sure what happened afterwards. We just packed down and got the hell out of there. Then, strangely, a few years later, we got an inquiry from the bride and best man to play their wedding at the same venue. Story 11. I've performed over 3,500 weddings. I rarely keep track of my success record because once they say I do and pay me, that's as far as our contract goes. With that being said, there's a stark contrast between couples who are a really good match and couples who I don't see spending the rest of their lives putting up with things. The good couples are there for each other. They're each other's rocks. Their words toward each other are kind. Their words about one another when separated are loving, understanding, and empathetic. You can tell their lives have melded so completely that when you talk to them separately before the ceremony, you sense something is missing from them. You see the completeness when they're standing together. Then there's the flip side of that coin. There's a groom who says unkind things, but only joking, like how she's always late or how she's probably gabbing with her bridesmaids. The bride will lightly berate her groom for not doing something or for doing the right thing the wrong way. You can tell they may have been good friends and maybe even good lovers, but lifelong partners? I see so many people go off to their respective best friends after that first kiss instead of holding on to one another like life depended on it. If you spend the majority of your wedding day hanging out with your buds, I can't predict the future, but that isn't promising. Lifelong partners must be unendingly kind to one another. I see so many people get into the trap of sarcasm. It's light and joking at first, but it always escalates. Sarcasm is a substance that will destroy relationships. If you find yourself getting into sarcasm with someone you love and you want to keep them, identify it and end it immediately. Sarcasm replaces important communication, difficult takes you really need to have and settle. The best couples are the ones who are unafraid of being vulnerable with their feelings. They will tell me, almost like it's a secret, how weak and powerless they are in the face of the love they have for their significant other. That's probably the best advice I've read in a long time. What wedding moment made you think, they're not going to last long? Then she went alone on her honeymoon because she booked the trip to the Caribbean despite her newlywed husband having a severe sun allergy. She was a good friend and they had been together for some years. They married young and it didn't occur to them that it would be strange if she went on the honeymoon and he stayed behind. He was a good guy and just wanted to see her happy, and she really wanted to go on this vacation because she had never left the country. They separated half a year after the wedding, and my friend, the bride, told me that the marriage had been a way to prolong the relationship despite both of them knowing that it was already over some time before they got married. Kinda like a couple gets a baby to save a marriage. It really was just sad because they were a nice couple, but they stayed friends after separating. And I can guarantee that she didn't cheat on him all the way. They were both really loyal. About his sun allergy, he had red hair, a really fair skin, and burned up within minutes. And I mean really bad sunburn, the kind you have to go to the hospital for. He always had to wear sunglasses, long-armed shirts, and a hat, even on cloudy days, so the vacation was not for him. I bet their wedding photos are interesting. Him fully covered in protective gear, her radiant. The honeymoon photos, just her. Iconic. Story 2. I was the best man at a wedding a few years back. At the rehearsal dinner, his future in-laws were treating him like crap. They were bossing him around, making him do crap and talking down to him. They didn't let him hang out with his groomsmen afterwards while the bride went out and got hammered. They are now divorced. Story 3. My father-in-law initially came at me with a suppressive attitude, pre-wedding, and he invited me to go firing thinking I'd be worried about it, so I went. Sometime in the conversation I told him, I quit giving a crap what my parents said 8 years ago when I got thrown out of my house, and I've been taking care of myself ever since. To be honest, I'd rather get along with you, but if we can't make that happen, that's even less I have to give a crap about. A lot of problems come from people not standing up for themselves. And it's impossible without that, as well as the couple standing up for each other and having this is our family attitude. Fortunately, my wife cared more about our relationship than her parents. I still tolerate her dad and we're pleasant to each other, and he doesn't cross lines with me like he does with other in-laws. Wife and I have been married for over 20 years. Story 4. I was kindly included in the last-minute +1 to the wedding of a family friend who had never met before. At the rehearsal dinner, or the German equivalent, the Paul Terabend, the guests smashed ceramic and porcelain items on the ground. I was fresh in Germany, so this was all pretty out of context and frightening, but my boyfriend explained that it's a tradition, reminding the couple that life is sometimes difficult and you have to work together to clean it up. The bride kind of half-heartedly motioned to the groom to sweep it up. He did a little bit, then just moved on to talk to his friends, leaving most of the shards strewn around the yard. Additionally, I don't think I saw the couple talk to each other once over the next 3 days of celebrations. It was a gorgeous wedding, and I'm so grateful that I was invited. Really good way to begin living in a new country. But it wasn't surprising to hear that they divorced a few years later. Story 5. Wedding photographer here. I can think of a few. Full-blown row during dinner, and another couple fistfight during the first dance. An infamous one for me was leaving a venue late one night, and as I'm walking to the train, I can see the bride down an alley, on her knees with the best man. I was the wedding photographer for a reality TV show. End of the night, I'm having a few drinks with the film crew, and the groom has come up to me and one of the producers and says, "I think I've made a big mistake." So we're trying to be reassuring and telling him it's natural to second-guess such a big decision, to which he replies, "No, I think I'm gay." I had them both on Facebook. The drama the next week was mesmerizing to watch unfold. Story 6. Showed up to the wedding of a friend of my husband's who I knew casually. When we arrived at the church, the groom was very hammered in the parking lot and getting more intoxicated by the minute. I thought it was kind of crazy since it was a full Catholic ceremony, which involved lots of kneeling and standing. I honestly have no idea how he made it though, but he did. At the reception, he proceeded to continue the drinking party, while his new wife cried in the washroom. When it was the time for the first dance, he kind of stumbled around the dance floor despite a year of dance lessons. When it was time for him to take his new wife's garter off and throw it to the bachelors, he instead did a tease-type dance and got himself down in front of many elderly family members. People were shocked and talking, and all in all, it was a crap show. They gave this marriage a year or two tops. They, however, are still married 25-plus years later. Story 7. I was maid of honor. Me, the best man, and a couple went into a separate little room to do the signing stuff. Bride excused herself to go to the bathroom, and the groom started making pretty mean remarks about her cooking. SJH she's passionate about, to the officiary. She came back, heard they were talking about cooking family meals together, and gave him the warmest smile, thinking he had praised her. He scoffed awkwardly and changed the topic. That always stuck with me. He wasn't laughing with her, but at her, behind her back. It lasted 7 months. Story 8. The ceremony was delayed because the bride and groom were on the phone with the groom's mother, who refused to come to the wedding, trying to be talked into still going through with it. Apparently, they had a huge and physical fight the night before. The roommate at the time didn't come either. He told me what he saw in the house the night before was enough for him to know this wedding was doomed and they should not be dating, let alone getting married. Story 9. My wife got invited to a client's daughter's wedding. The couple were both drama students. Many of the bridal party were drama students. The maid of honor's toast consisted of tearful declarations of unrequited love to the groom, along the lines of, "If it couldn't be me, I'm glad it's my best friend that's marrying you." The best man's speech was a crazy declaration of, "If it doesn't work out, call me, babe," like the previous time he called me. The other toasts were similarly weird. A guy at the table I was seated at was a friend of the bride and said to me that he was this close to standing up during the "speak now or forever hold your peace" thing. I'm still not sure if the whole thing was a bunch of emotionally messed up 20-year-olds or one big piece of performance art. Story 10. My best friend's wedding is tomorrow, and I told her about how I've heard several wedding photographers or videographers say that shoving cake in the face is almost a sure factor that they're going to divorce. She told me, "Oh yeah, I told him not to, but he probably will anyways." So we'll see how this goes. This wedding is going to be less happily ever after and more happily ever after the divorce. Just skipping a step, really. Story 11. I live for these threads. Anyway, I know a photographer who has offered to shoot a wedding on the Gold Coast, Australia. If you're from Australia, then you know the Gold Coast, while beautiful, has a lot of Jersey Shore types living there. It's kind of like Miami, but no celebrities and very, very trashy. My friend is getting drinks with everybody getting dressed up at the same time because the groom, groomsmen, bride, and bridesmaids are all getting ready in the same room. The groom decided to have his bucks party, bachelor, stag do, the night before, so they're all hungover as crap and doing substances. Something that is making my photographer friend's job hard because she can't get any nice shots of the groom or groomsmen without these things in view. The energy in the room is getting uncomfortable, so the bride asks if they could take it easy on the substances and get a couple of nice photos. The groom yells, "Shut up!" and keeps doing more. The girl who got my friend the gig said they divorced 4 months later. Another friend of mine was pressured into marrying his girlfriend of like 8 years because she dropped an ultimatum. "Propose to me within a year or we're done." He does, so they get married, but of every wedding photo she posted on Facebook, neither one of them looked happy. They divorced barely a year into the marriage. Story 12. I'm a wedding photographer and have a few of these. When a very young, not dating, long couple say things like the partner is perfect and we never fight. When there's name-calling, I particularly cringe that it's because we get each other and are so comfortable that he can call me Dumb Witch as a nickname. Hey didn't last the year. One where the wedding was all about the groom promoting his band. He even sang his bride a song that was literally just him showing off his vocal range with some classic piece. She stood up and joined him on stage halfway through, and he looked annoyed that he had to share the limelight. They lasted about 2 years. He was sleeping with the other vocalist in the band. Story 13. This was my sister's best friend, and it was a bachelorette party moment. Bride had been having an affair. Everyone knew it. The groom's friends tried to tell him, but she convinced him they were making it up. I mean, at that point, it was just sad. She actually had the to force fiancé to apologize to the guy she was sleeping with for the accusations. The night of the bachelorette party, she actually took all of her bridesmaids back to the other guy's house and spent the night with him. They came to their wedding. It was so awkward. Everyone knew and everyone was talking. The groom was told, but chose to overlook it. After the wedding, she insisted the other guy come on vacations with her and her husband and included him in all their social functions. Now, if they're non-monogamous, whatever, go crazy. But her husband was an absolute wreck about it for years, and she just kept gaslighting him. No one could convince him to leave her. She told my sister that the affair guy insisted he would never marry her and didn't want kids, so she was using fiancé to get them. They ended up divorcing 2 years later after their second child was born. She immediately moved in with the affair guy, and they did end up getting married. Story 14. At my boyfriend's sister's wedding, the groom got hammered before the vows and smoked after the vows. Was cross-faded as hell and made a fool of himself. When we went up to congratulate them after, she refused to be near him or take pictures of them. It was awkward. After the speeches, basically everyone left. Family was still around and they opened gifts. Someone gave her some nice champagne and the groom tried to open it and dropped it and it shattered. Bride stormed off screaming. Groom got upset and started screaming out in the air. They still went to their honeymoon together in Florida and she got pregnant almost immediately. Maybe 7 months into her pregnancy, she kicked him out because he slept with a roommate. They got divorced when their kid was 6 months old. But it's for the best. The dude is a POS and wasted a lot of their money by being selfish on their day. Story 15. I'm witnessing one from the sidelines now. My wife's brother just got married this past May. Bride's mother is a big DIY person and went a little nuts with extra flowers, table pieces, decorations, etc. Note I said extra. It was already decorated by the venue, she just took it upon herself to buy and add way more stuff. Anyway, a few weeks ago, she sent my mother-in-law, groom's mom, an email with receipts of all the extra stuff she bought, $7,000 worth, and asked that she pay half since it was technically set up in time for their rehearsal dinner for guests to enjoy. It's causing a huge rift between the newlyweds since the bride is taking her mom's side. Story 16. She had a panic attack while getting ready that he wouldn't show up while implying he didn't actually want to be married again, but they were too far into it for him to back out. They were both barely 21, and it was his second marriage. Did I mention they got engaged 6 weeks after they met? And they only waited that long because his divorce wasn't final. She was relieved when he did show and only had a few shots to build up his courage to be there, i.e. he was crap-faced by 11 a.m. They separated a year later, but she somehow ended up pregnant around the same time. They got back together for the baby and then divorced when the baby was 2. Within a month of separating, she, and their kid, was living with a new guy that she had known for 3 weeks. Story 17. Where to start? The best man was the groom's dealer who dressed in tux, the only one in a tux. The groom was spiked and giggled throughout the whole ceremony. The host of the party alternated between arguing with his wife in Russian and running up to us every time he saw us, the bride's friends, the only people that showed up from her side at the wedding. Whenever he saw us in groups of 2 or more and tell us, "Don't smoke. If she, his wife, won't let me smoke in the house, then you guys can't." Every time we grouped up. Story 18. Friend's wedding back in 2016. A somewhat nice affair for us, given we were in our early 20s and all. I was a bridesmaid and really hadn't met the groom much prior. It was nice, but quiet. Day before the wedding, the bride, a longtime friend, asked me to help babysit one of the groomsmen because he was a nightmare. Asked me, another bridesmaid, DJ, works to help cut him off from alcohol before the ceremony, not to allow him to make a speech, keep him from hitting on girls, the works. He had drinking habits with 6 kids and 2 DUIs, but was the absolute best friend to the groom. Day of the wedding, the best schmuck breaks into the bar, gets hammered, has to be dragged down the aisle, gets the florist intoxicated while they pretty much have intimacy in the dance floor, and makes what I can only assume be a speech during the father-daughter dance. The bride was mad, and stressed, as well as trying to get things to be not a total crap show. The groom blocked us from keeping him in check, wanting us to just let it go while he did everything the bride asked him not to do. It was like a weird, purposeful or intentional self-sabotage thing. Schmuck also broke into the groom's private stash of homemade meat he'd made special just for the wedding and ran through the parking lot hiding in the bushes at 11 p.m. Same night, the couple texted me asking if I wanted to be their third in their open relationship, which I found out later was mostly the groom's idea. I also found out later they got married pretty quickly because she suddenly needed medical benefits, all the while he had been asking for an open relationship for the complete duration of them being together. She'd only acquiesce if he would marry her as well. Divorce finalized a year and a half later. Story 19. I wasn't at a wedding, but it was the first time I really sat down to talk to the couple. I came to town about a year after the wedding, and my wife, cousin to the groom, and I met them for drinks at one of the cool parts of the cool city. One of the first topics of conversation was what we knew about the lifestyle scene. Afterward, I pointed out to my wife that the bride seemed to have been rather openly and boldly flirting with her. My wife shrugged it off because I'm often pretty terrible at that kind of thing. We met one more time, this time for a funeral. After the ceremony, we were hanging out in a hotel room, drinking. The bride again seemed to be pretty openly flirting with my wife, and this time was going out of her way to show off her talent for bedroom knots. Again, the groom is there in the room. I pointed out all of this again, and this time my wife tacitly agreed. The two would divorce soon after. The bride, it seems, only discovered, or accepted, that she was a lesbian after she'd gone married. Story 20. Not a wedding moment as much as a bachelor party moment, but my ex got married to a woman 2 years ago from a super conservative religious family. We were still friends for the most part, and I was surprised he asked me to be a groomsman, but I figured, hey, it's always good to be able to stay friends with your exes. That feels like mature growth and closure. I got really intoxicated at the bachelor party and at one point asked me if I ever had any regrets about us breaking up. I said I had loved him, but no. He had made the right decision in the long run. And then he told me that he sometimes wishes that we were getting married the next week and how his fiance's family will never accept him. And then after an awkward pause, he said, "What if we just run away together?" Laughed it off as a joke and said we should rejoin the group. Then he said it again later, again in a joke tone, and then a third time later in the night. We had been friends for years, but only dated for like 6 months. Turns out he asked the same thing to another one of his exes who wasn't a groomsman but was attending the wedding. The couple is still together, technically, but separated. Story 21. I've got two. One of my good friends got married and had never met her before the wedding because she's just shy. On the wedding day, she was belligerently intoxicated before the ceremony even started and couldn't even get through the lines she was supposed to repeat, i.e., "I promise to love you." She ended up slapping the groom, spilling champagne in her dress, and then crying under a table while he tried to comfort her. They lasted about 4 months. Another one was my wife's friend. She's a very conservative, religious white girl who married a black man. Most of her prejudiced family didn't approve the marriage and didn't show up, but she planned the whole marriage around race, like a vanilla cake for her and a chocolate cake for him. The wedding colors were black and white, and even the meals were white meat for her side and dark meat for his. I was extremely uncomfortable as a guest. They lasted 2 years, but broke up because he was cruel and almost ended her, rather than the weird racial tension. Story 22. She told me 2 days before that she found her fiancé annoying and that she didn't like him and that he was awful in bed. She was visibly, endlessly uncomfortable at the rehearsal wedding or dinner combo. Then she sobbed the entire morning, day of. She ended up not getting any makeup done because she wouldn't stop scream-sobbing and refused to get dressed, stalling the wedding around 35 minutes. She then said 45 minutes of vows that she had prepared, 9 pages of things like inappropriate vows to friends and family, his parents and sisters, none of them her husband. Then almost didn't say "I do." Managed to get yeah, I do, out of her almost a full 60 seconds after she was supposed to say anything. I could go on for hours, but it was the most painful and awkward wedding I've ever been to. I got my money in 10 months. We're 1 month in. Story 23. Not at the wedding itself, but I used to work at David's Bridal. Bride came in with tons of friends. We did the say yes to the dress thing, and an hour later, she'd be standing there with $3,000 worth of stuff and doesn't have any money with her or in her account. She decides she wants to apply for the store credit card. I run it through the system, and she gets denied. She then calls the groom for his info, which, to be fair, people did all the time, and he tells her no. She threw a huge fit in the phone with him, standing on the bridal stage, literally demanding, "Why not? Why? Why?" Like an actual child over and over again. I've never seen a 30-year-old age backwards so quickly. It was just a spoiled kid, literally stomping her feet in front of me, all her friends, and the other bride in the store. I was embarrassed. At the end of all that, she hangs up on him, and her friend is like, "I'm so sorry you can't get your dress." And the bride stops crying instantly and just goes, "Oh, I'll get the dress. I just have to do this at home, and when he gets mad enough, he'll come get it for me, so I'll stop." Speechless. Sure enough, girl came back 2 days later with her man, and he applied for the credit card and bought the dress. He was livid and silent, and she was smug as hell. Can't imagine they're having a happy marriage if they're still together. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 24. The couple has lasted, but the relationship to one of their families hasn't. Lesbian wedding. One of them is very sweet, but comes from a very trashy Irish-American family. At the reception, her drunk father stands up and takes the microphone and sings a traditional Irish wedding song, very pointedly not changing the genders. When a man leaves his mother, etc. This went on for like 7 minutes, and it felt like hours. My cousin was marrying her, and she looked about ready to punch the old guy's lights out. Story 25. It was mine. Ex-wife had a taste for theatrics and wanted a choreographed dance number for the first dance. Wanted the whole wedding party involved, but there was no interest. I'd never danced, not even at a club, but was willing to take lessons with her with the understanding he would do something together so she could have her dream wedding. I sucked, but got through a few lessons of flow dancing. I can now awkwardly shuffle around, but don't expect anything crazy. The dance school wouldn't choreograph anything for us, so she probably gave up. When it came to choosing the song, she decided she wanted I Want You To by Weezer, my favorite band, and the song just come out recently, which has a jamboree feel to it. It is not a slow song to slow dance to. I suggested we choose something else, but she insisted we would just slow dance to it. I made her promise she wouldn't change her mind. Sure enough, 30 seconds into the song, she backs up and starts dancing a jig. I just stood there in disbelief, fuming, while she kept shouting and motioning for me to dance in front of all our guests. To boot, we had set a budget. She exceeded it. Then our parents decided to chip in $5,000, and rather than use it to offset what we were over budget, she decided to spend more. In retrospect, that should have been a huge clue that she didn't respect me at all. Cheated on me and ran off with some guy like a year later. Got remarried before we were legally divorced. Our parents never did hand over the $5,000 because they'd put a provision on it that we had to group north for a weekend and take some stupid Christian financial planning course their friend ran. My ex was also an atheist and didn't want to do that, but knowingly spent the money we didn't actually have. For frick's sake. Story 26. While they were planning the wedding, the bride came to me and asked, "Is it normal to realize that getting married is a huge mistake but still go through with it? Do you think we can still be happy?" I tried to talk gently to her about everything, and she admitted that her and her groom had already had intimacy and that if she didn't marry him, nobody else would want used goods and she would go to hell. They got married. The worst part is they'll probably stay married forever because they're very religious and God doesn't allow for divorce. It was really hard to watch the bride cry as she walked down the aisle. Not happy tears either. Story 27. I went to a wedding held at my town's hunting lodge. Tons of stuffed animals on the walls and no AC in July. Bride was 7 months pregnant and smoking outside in between the wedding and the after party, and the new husband was totally crap-faced by the second song, which was by Nirvana as requested by the bride's 16-year-old daughter. The whole thing was one giant trashy show. They divorced a year later. I'm guessing the wedding favors were tiny bottles of whiskey and a good luck with that note. Story 28. When I was in college, I went to a wedding with my girlfriend at the time during one summer. She and I had only been together for a few months, so it was actually the first time I had met the bride and the groom and most of her family for that matter. I didn't really say anything to my girlfriend at the time because I didn't know them at all, aside from the story she told me, but I had a feeling they wouldn't last very long. At the reception, she spent most of her time just talking with her friends and didn't interact much with anyone else at all. He went around and tried to get time with everyone, but every so often I would see him with her and she would kind of not even acknowledge that he was there very much. When I walked past her one time on the way to grab a beer, she was bragging to her friends about how much money the dress cost her and how he wanted her to get a cheaper one, but she wouldn't have it. At one point of the night, I was outside smoking with some of the other guests and he came out the back and asked to bum a cigarette. It was one of those types of people that only smokes when they were intoxicated, which apparently it wasn't that often for him since he was doing his residency at the hospital. So he was always really busy. The entire time he kept looking at the door, and whenever it opened and someone came out, he quickly moved his hand holding the cigarette behind his bag because he thought it was her. It was like he was scared of her and not in a playful way. It didn't surprise me when about a year later they got divorced. Apparently she just kind of was taking advantage of him. Staying home all day, she didn't work, spending thousands of dollars ordering clothes and shoes online using his money and credit cards she took out in their names. Story 29. That was my thinking of my own wedding. I had no control over it. It was all his family. At the reception at the local fairgrounds. Fried chicken and corn on the cob for the meal. Husband chewed me out that there would be no music and absolutely no dancing because he refused to dance. Mother-in-law and son-in-law ordered 6 cases of cheap champagne and got mad when no one would drink it, including me, then literally could not give it away. The after-party, as the reception was like 2 hours for lunch, was at the mother-in-law's. The husband promised as a wedding gift that he was officially done smoking. He had his entire family form a circle around him so he could quickly try to smoke a whole pack. blocked from my view. I had a friend pick me up and I left. There are significantly more what-the-heck moments before and after, but he lasted 2 months. Story 30. I worked at a museum that also doubled as a wedding venue in the summers. As part of the wedding package, the museum would stay open after hours for the guests, only so I'd just sit there and greet people, basically. One wedding got particularly rowdy. Almost everyone was intoxicated, people were jumping into the fountain, someone vomited in said fountain. At one point, the bride is crying. Turns out the groom and one of his groomsmen were upstairs in one of their bathrooms. A fight ensued between the groom and the father of the bride, and cops were called because it really got ugly. Entertaining for me, but I felt so bad for the bride. Story 31. Not the couple getting married, but the best man and maid of honor who were married to each other. Best man's speech was all about how hard it was to be married. I've been married for a year and it feels like 100 years. Maid of honor stands up to give a speech and just says, "Ditto." It was so awkward and really brought the whole room down. Brother of the bride stood up and gave a nice impromptu speech about teamwork and having a partner to go through life with. How happy the family was to have the groom join their family. Best man and maid of honor were divorced within a year. Couples who got married are still married 30 plus years later. I sometimes wonder if the speeches actually were helpful and how to not act as a couple. For me, the complex backstory. Bride's brother is gay and has been in a long-term relationship for 40 plus years. At the time he gave his speech about marriage, he couldn't marry the man he loved, and I think his passionate defense of marriage was born from that. When people would say they were against gay marriage because it makes a mockery of marriage, I'd think of that night. The married couple who had no respect for marriage could easily marry, and did over and over again, and the man who stood up and defended marriage could not. He's married now, and lovingly takes care of his husband as he battles health issues. Story 32. This would be the wedding of my own parents. They'd been divorced for many years, but told us, the kids and their spouses, they were planning to get remarried. I would like to go with them to Las Vegas to witness this event. We were all still in our 20s, so we thought, hell yeah. Flash forward to 2 days into the weekend, and there's been no word of a wedding. The kids all had a conversation. What should we do? Should we ask about it? That should have been our first clue that it wasn't a good idea for them to get married, but lack of perspective made us oblivious to the obvious. So we pressured them. Hey, you told us you were going to get remarried. When are you going to do it? Anyway, then we suddenly found ourselves in a courtroom speaking to the judge. He was wise and asked to speak privately to my parents, and I'm sure asked them, "Why are you doing this? Are you sure?" Well, I guess they gave him the correct answers because he did it. Long story short, they ended up divorcing again, not long afterwards. Story 33. Not quite a wedding moment, but I had one at a dinner my ex-wife and I had with some newlywed friends of hers. It was 10 days after their wedding, and we all went out to dinner at a local restaurant that had a psychic act that played in their bar. My ex-wife and her friend wanted to get their palms or tea leaves or whatever read. While the two ladies were with a psychic 10 days after the wedding, 3 days after returning from the honeymoon, the creep suggested we plan to go to Vancouver, BC, since street working had recently been decriminalized there, and it was only a few hours' drive. I declined. They also told my ex-wife, who eventually told a friend who was a paralegal who divorced her husband within 18 months. And that's how karma paid for all the document prep for my amicable divorce. Story 34. There is this couple I know. They've been in and out of their relationship for several years, sometimes only a few weeks in between breakups. They're constantly fighting, and the girl is a manipulative witch. It took them 3 years between deciding to get married and actually doing it because she kept toying with him, breaking up every time they got close. He's not much better either. The type of guy who gets hammered and aggressive, picking fights for the hell of it. She used to have a crush on me and vice versa, and I thank God for dodging that bullet in the end. I just feel bad for their kid who has to grow up in such an environment. Story 35. Source, my wedding. We'll start 3 days before. The wedding was a Ren Fair-style wedding outside of the large gazebo, and the maid of honor had promised to purchase a stylized dress for my bride that they had agreed on. 3 days before the wedding, she called to tell us she had no money and was embarrassed to admit it. So we literally hand-sewed knot together in 24 hours. In my opinion, it turned out pretty nice for what we had. The bride's mother was supposed to pick up the cake in ATX and drive an hour south for the wedding. She left her house 30 minutes before the wedding to pick it up. When she finally showed up, an hour late, the cake was destroyed. She put it in the backseat and drove like hell all the way down, just slamming it against the box with every turn. During the hour delay, there was almost a fistfight between the two groomsmen because, well, the maid of honor showed up in the dress that she was unable to afford. Obvious attempts to upstage the bride. The same maid of honor during her speech after the ceremony started it off by saying, "Well, we all met. I did not like Dracarim 411 at all. However, I found that he grows on you, like a fungus." Needless to say, my entire side of the family was super cold to all of this. Since all of these issues were on her side of friendships or families, I was told to suck it up and we'll discuss later. I sort of assumed that a lot of these friends had just shown themselves the door. Quite the opposite. In fact, 2 years later, when I accepted my first well-paying job out of college, it became an issue that it was an hour and a half out of Austin. So she decided to just stay in ATX to be with her friends. I mailed the divorce papers, and since she couldn't be bothered to even show up to the hearing, I've never seen her again. Story 36. I was a deputy sheriff taking an in-custody defendant to his court date. Turns out it was his wedding appointment. When the judge asked if there was anyone who objected, the assistant DA in the back stood up and proceeded to blow my mind. The groom had a pending domestic case later that day where the bride was also the victim. The man was well known as cruel. On the last call, he held a weapon to the brides before being taken into custody. They were getting married so the bride could not be compelled to testify against the groom. The entire courtroom went silent until the judge spoke. Well, who am I to stand in the way of love? And with that, he banged his gravel. They were married. The ADA's case fell apart. He was released that day and back in jail by the next week. I'll let you guess what he was arrested for. Story 37. When she blackmailed the guy into a proposal. When he joined the military to get away. When he came home to her living with her new boyfriend and his son effectively in a cage watching movies all day. When she screamed, "If you leave me, I will take their son away from you forever." He left. She threw him in jail with an offense. He was given probation. She was so messed up the court still sided with him in custody. He was living with a son and new wife, living a happy life. She is not great. Story 38. I've been to a few. The first was a tossed-together Santa-themed wedding for my wife's cousin. He'd gotten his girlfriend pregnant, so they rushed to get married before the baby came. The wedding was held at a VFW with the groom and bride dressed as Santa and Mrs. Claus. The groomsmen and bridesmaids were all dressed as Christmas elves, and the music was provided via a boombox. It was 1997. You could tell that no one was happy about the wedding. The parents of the couple just glared at each other, and I don't think they ever spoke. I honestly think the only one who was excited was the groom. They had the baby a couple months later and were divorced almost immediately thereafter. Another was a 19-year-old friend of my daughter. My daughter was the maid of honor and really didn't like the groom. Apparently, he was from a very conservative Christian family, but had managed to hide most of his most extreme beliefs. The wedding started off typical enough, but soon veered off into craziness. There was talk about the wife submitting to and obeying the husband, that she was his helpmate, and she was to provide him with children. It was very Handmaid's Tale and came as a total shock to most people in attendance. Several people around me audibly gasped, and the minister essentially said the only responsibility of the husband was to consider his wife. The marriage lasted less than a year, and thankfully they split up before they had kids. Story 39. Guy's friend got married. At the reception, she's on one side of the room talking. He's across the hall. Same thing, talking to someone else. She either snapped her fingers or did the come here finger sign. I can't remember which it was, but she summoned him to her. When he got there, she wanted him to hold her train, and she kept on with her conversation. Typed out, it doesn't sound that bad, but when it happened, I was like, really, lady? It was rather degrading to watch him get treated like her servant. Turns out they're still together, but for his sake, I wish that hadn't been the case. Story 40. My best friend always dreamed of her wedding day, having children, etc. They had been friends since we were 2, so I know. We talked about it a lot, and we vowed we would be each other's maid of honor. The boy came into her life, and she was head over heels for him, but he never really seemed to be the romantic type. Long story short, they got engaged, and all of a sudden she didn't want a big wedding. She wanted an elopement with no bridesmaids. Then the talk of children came about, and she didn't want children anymore. I know that plans can change as we grow older, but this wasn't her. Nonetheless, I supported her. They did have a big reception. My only guess is that this was the compromise. At the reception, I remember the groom just not being around at all. He just drank and hung out with his friends and barely spent time with his wife. In my heart, I knew it wasn't going to last. Well, 5 years into the marriage, this man-child cheated on her and broke her. It took her a while to recover from it, but today she's so much better off with a man who's treating her right, and she's happily talking about the wedding she has always dreamed of and children. Story 41. The drive back to their hotel. I drove them from the wedding venue back to the hotel. I'd lined the back seats with plastic like a scene from Dexter because the groom couldn't stop retching. They were both unbelievably hammered. The entire ride, she screamed at him while he cried. She was furious the wedding had ended early, 12:30 a.m., because she wanted to dance and drink more. She had been cut off by the bartenders at midnight, and then her friends had also been cut off for giving her more drinks. I could have cleaned out the mess. I cannot clean out the awkwardness of that 15-minute drive. It was obvious this marriage was never going to make it. It's been 8 years. They're still together. Somewhere out there, there's a couples therapist who has earned their money. Story 42. My wife and I went to a cousin's wedding. Both of them were adults, still living at home. Both had low-paying jobs and had never been married. They were both 30 plus. When we got there, everyone was acting kind of weird during the ceremony and reception. We come to find out neither family wanted them getting married. The family priest did not want to do the services. It goes on and on. Weirdest thing ever. But they were oblivious to it all. It was like they were in a bubble. The marriage has been a tremendous success. They lifted each other up. Just goes to show there's a lid for every teapot. Story 43. My own. I used to be Mormon, and to get married in a Mormon temple is a big deal because you have to be in line with everything they teach and refrain from drinking. For marital intimacy, smoking, etc., get a temple recommendation. After we got changed into our temple clothes, the temple workers led us to a room right next to the sealing room where we could have a moment together before the ceremony started. After the worker left the room, I turned to my fiancé and said, "We did it. We made it. We're doing this." And he just looked me straight in the eye with no emotion and said, I could still say no. With all of our family and friends in the room next to us, waiting for us to get married in a matter of minutes. People thought I was crying during the ceremony because I felt the spirit, but I was crying because I was marrying someone who, I realized, always made me question whether or not he loved me. Marriage was pretty much all like that. So after a year and shrinking into a shell of my former self, I left. I also left the Mormon church. I'm single and happy now, simply living with my dog and have no plans to ever remarry. Story 44. Me and my wife had a little wedding lunch with my friend and his fiancé, my wife, and the best man. We had brought our son with us because my friend getting married hadn't met him yet and he wanted to. It was a year and a half at the time, so naturally he was curious about being in a new place and getting into things that were visibly annoying her. As the afternoon progresses, naturally the question comes up, how long after the wedding do y'all want to have kids, if any? And it turns out he's suffering to have like 4+ kids and she hates kids and doesn't want any. They had a huge fight and we ended up leaving. They still ended up getting married and just celebrated 1 year a couple of weeks ago. But me and my wife, as well as the best man, are having some doubts. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.